All right, this is a recording for Subqueries for IT 221 SQL. This is chapter 5. I see objectives is misspelled there. This isn't the final version of the book. You'll be glad to know. We're going to talk about subqueries and the where clause and the select. We'll do table expressions, common table expressions, and a correlated subquery. A lot of people find subqueries difficult. Subqueries are, like their name suggests, a query inside of another query. You can nest queries, and you can do that to get really some good results with a lot of different things. So I may not go into this as much depth as the chapter. I always want you to read the chapter, even with the misspellings. So let me move this over to where I can see it. Okay, and then now here I've already set up the query editor, and we're going to talk about some queries. We're going to start with subqueries in the where clause. And one of the things it talks about that you can't do with a regular query is you can't say select, let's say we want to know the name. I'm going to say select last name. Actually, it has to be person last name. Person first name. And we're going to do a donation amount. And what we want to do is we can do like max. We want to see the highest donation amount. And we'll do it from donation. Okay. And then we have to group by person last name, person first name. And that's the problem. The problem is we can only see the maximum donation per person. We can't see which person does. Oh, you know what? I need to do an inner join here too. I'm going to join donation, and I'm going to use that alternate syntax using person key. Now it'll work. Did I do from donation more than once? Oh, join person. I've had coffee, but I guess I haven't had enough coffee. There we go. But it doesn't show us what we want to know, which is who gave us the maximum donation. So there's a couple of ways you could do that. One is you could just sort it by donation amount. But there's another way using a subquery. So I'm going to do select person last name, person first name, person, so the donation amount. And we're going to, from donation, join person using person key, and then we are going to add a where clause where donation amount equals select max donation amount from donation. Okay, so this is a subquery. Notice it's in parentheses. Subqueries will always be in parentheses. They have the whole query there. Selects max donation from donation. If I were to run just that, it would give me $10,000. When I run the whole thing, it tells me that Little Scott gave, or Scott Little gave, $10,000. Okay. So that's one use of a subquery in the where clause. Couple of other little notes about this. If you do an equal sign, this has to return one value only. It cannot return more than one value. If it does, it'll throw an error. If there's even the possibility that it could return more than one value, it will throw an error. So I am going to do another version of this. So this is where it's equal to. I'm going to do another one with in. I'm going to do select, I'm going to just say star from person address, where address, or person address, city, in. So let's break these. Where it's going to be in, this isn't a subquery, but I'm going to show you how this can apply to subqueries. I'm going to say where it's in Bellevue, and we'll do a comma Kent. So if it matches one of the things in this list, it will return those. See, there's Bellevue and there's Kent. So it returns the records based on whether they match that. You can use this with subqueries to get the effect of a join. So I'm going to do select person last name, person first name. And let's just do it to get where, and I'm going to say where person key in select person key from employee. So we want only the employees. And I'm going to add to that where employee key in, and I'm going to do this, start another parentheses, select employee key from grant review. Hopefully I got all the names right. We'll see when I run it. Couple of things that we're doing. We're selecting person, last name, and first name. First of all, where they're an employee, and then we're going further where the employee key is in the grant review. So again, it's just like a join. Person key to person key, employee key to employee key. It's just a different way of doing that. That's because I forgot. From person. All right. Now it goes. So these three people have done grant reviews. I'm going to do one last one in the where clause. One of the things that can work as is I'm going to select grant type name from grant type where, and then we'll do grant type key not in select grant type key from grant. Let's look at the names of the tables. from grant application. And this will do just like our outer join did. Right? It'll give us, it's just like an outer join. Oh, I forgot a T. You can tell I always have typos. I read the error messages to figure out what's going on. So there's our 2. There. Okay, so that's where subqueries. Again, subquery has always got a parentheses. It's always the whole query. And we did equal, which means that it can only return one answer. But if you use in, you can select from a list. And in this, we're selecting from the list of person keys that are in employee and from the list of employee keys that are in grant review. This is also looking for a list, but we're looking for something that is not in the list. All right, subqueries in the select are a little bit more confusing, and I'm going to build one up in several stages here. You can put a subquery basically anywhere. And we're going to do this for we're going to look at some grant application amounts. All right. So this is the one in the chapter. Sorry, it took me a minute to read that. So I am going to select, and we're going to get the year. We've done this before. The first version of this won't have any subqueries. So I'm going to extract the year from grant application as from grant application date, and we'll just call it as year. I double quote year because it is a reserved word. All right. I'm also going to get the grant type name. And we'll just put that in as it is. And then we'll do the sum of the grant application amount as subtotal. And then we will do the average. And this won't have a, there we go. Should have 2 T's. All right, so average grant application amount as average. And from grant application, so I'm going to do an inner join. I guess I'll use this traditional inner join grant type on grant type dot grant type key equals grant application dot grant type key. Okay. So we're going to do it for only 1 year. So I'm going to copy this. equals 2020. And we need to do some group bys, because we need to group by anything that's not part of a function. So we need to group by the extract, the explanation date, and grant type name. And then we'll order by the same. Okay, so this is our thing. This is the base. I'm going to put that there. No subqueries yet. The base, as you can see, is complicated enough, right? So if I run this, let's put a semicolon there. And if I run this, where do I have a period instead of here, instead of a comma? Okay, so it gives us for the year 2020, it gives us the different types that have been requested, and it gives us the amounts. Okay, and then this is the average. We can clean that up if we want to later to make it pretty. So we might take it to pretty. So let's add. I'm going to do this as a add subquery to get the grand total. So we want to know how much there was totally granted, right? So these are the requests. These are the requests for the grants. We're actually doing the requests. We want to know the total requested. So we are going to do this same query, but we're going to add a subquery to it. And we're going to add the subquery right after the average. So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to put in a parentheses, and I'm going to say select sum grant application amount all right, and I'm going from grant application, and I'm going to give this the total as the name from that. So this is a subquery. The thing about the subquery is that it is not subject to any of the group bys. This will give us the total of all of the rows. So when I run this now, we have a total column, and it's the same all the way down, notice, because it is the grand total. Let me bring this up a little bit. Let me close this a little. Okay, so, and this, because we're going to have more room here. Again, we can fix this later. Actually, let's do it. Let's fix it now. I'm just going to round it. So I added a round to the average. Just because it's kind of annoying me. Okay. So this is our grand total. This is the total per type. This is the average per type, and this is the total. Now what I want to do is get what percent the amount requested is of the total requested. And that's going to take another subquery and more. So I'm going to take the sum of grant application amount. Now this one is because it's not part of a subquery, this one is subject to the group by. It will be grouped by childcare, dental, etc. But I'm going to divide it by this, right? The grand total. You get a percent by dividing the part by the whole. We probably will want to, and then I'm going to label it as percentage, so that it's not a keyword. All right, so we want to do all of this. And we'll probably want to round that too. So I might actually, how do I want to do this? I might actually break this. Somewhere. So if I do a round, and I'm going to do a comma 2. All right, that should still work. Okay, so that gives us our percent. Actually, to get a full percent, a real percent, we would need times 100. Let's see if that works. Yes, so it's 8%, and we could make it with the 2-car. We could make it all look like dollars and percents and etc. But look at what we've done. We've got the subtotal for each kind. We've got the average of each request for each kind. We've got the total, grand total of all requests, and we've got what percent each of these subtotals is of the grand total. And we did that with subqueries. So it's a little bit confusing, as I said. So here is the subquery that gets us the grand total. It's a complete query. It's independent of all the rest of the things. When we do the percent, we do the this sum, which is going to be grouped by these, but then we do a subquery, which is not grouped, subject to the group by. Right? And then we... so this is the subquery, and then we do it. So subqueries can be really useful. Okay, that'll probably be confusing and work. Read the chapter, walk through the steps. There's one assignment like that, and you can do it. It'll take you a while, but it's kind of fun once you get it working. All right, so I'm going to look at queries in the from clause. Let's go down here. And these are called table or derived expressions. So let's do a simple one. I am going to do select first name, last name, and I know that they're person, first name, and that, but I'm actually doing this on donation date and amount. And we're going to do it from, and this is where the subquery comes in. I'm going to do select person first name as first name, person last name as last name. And we can use the aliases in the query up above. Donation date. And I'm going to do donation amount as amount. And then we'll do this from person. Inner join donation. On person dot person key equals donation dot person key. So what you're doing in a way is you're creating a table here that you're querying from. In the from clause, you're basically querying from a query. We have to name this. Even though we don't use it here, we have to name it as donations. Right? You have to name the subquery because you're essentially making it substitute as a table. Okay, so that's a query in the from clause. And you can do this. I mean, basically you're querying a query. It's a little bit backwards though because you're using the pseudonyms before you've assigned them. So there's another way to do this, which is a common table expression. And I'm just going to do these fairly quickly. Again, I suggest reading the book because I have a lot more discussion of there. I am going to change the same one with, I'm going to say with donations as, and I'm going to open up a parentheses, and basically I am going to put all of these in here, same query. And then I am going to do the select last name. Well, let's do first name. Select first name, last name, amount, donation date. Okay, from donations. So, a couple of things. This is exactly the same as this, except that it's more logical. We are defining the subquery, we're defining the table before we select from it. This is actually the preferred form, common table expressions. Again, we are defining donations as this subquery, and then we select from it. The results will be exactly the same. Okay, so this is the common table expression, and this is the regular table or derived expression. They both work the same, but the common table expression actually is more logical because it defines the table before you query from it, or the query before you query from it. I'm going to do, there's a lot more discussion of this in the, a lot more examples in the chapter. You should read that. But I'm going to do the very last one, which is complicated. A correlated subquery is a lot like a recursive function. So it's a query in which the inner subquery queries the outer query. It requires the outer query. So I am going to show you this. So we're going to do, we want to compare likes with likes. So if I'm going to do a grant application key, grant type key, and grant application amount. All right, so one of the things we're going to see which ones are above the average requests, which ones are kind of high. The trick is we cannot, we don't want to compare. Let me do a quick one of select grant type names from grant type. We're going to do that real quick just to have a reference. When we want to see what's above the average, we don't want to compare rent to school or food to medical. It just isn't a fair connection. You're not comparing like to like. You're not comparing things that matter or that make sense compared. So we want to compare things that resemble each other. We wanted to compare food to food, rent to rent, school to school, etc. I'm doing the keys here because I don't want to complicate this with joins, though you could. So I'm going to do from grant application, and I'm going to call it G1. You could call it whatever you want, but basically we're aliasing the table. We have to do this because we're going to deal with it in two different ways. So I'm saying where grant application amount is greater than, and then I'm going to do a subquery, select average grant application amount from grant application. I'm actually going to break this so that it kind of looks. Now this would work, except that again it would be comparing the average overall, so it wouldn't make sense. You wouldn't be comparing food to food and not rent to rent. So the way you make it compare is you add where. So this one was G1. I'm going to name this one G2. So this will be grant application 2, where G1 dot grant type key equals G2 dot grant type key. So it's going to compare them. It's going to compare food to food and rent to rent. I'm going to order. So I'm going to move these back a little bit. And I'm going to add a where clause where, not a where, an order by. We'll order by grant type key. So let's run this. Oh, I forgot my parentheses here. Okay, now where? And then I have an extra one here. Left out a T. If it says something that doesn't exist, chances are excellent that you misspelled something. All right, so let's look. So this says that grant application 20 and 46 are higher than the average. We can test that. Let's do select average grant application amount from grant application where grant type key is equal to 1. Okay, so 450 and 800 are above that. 1 is food, by the way. So let's look at what the average is. The average is 269. So both of those are above it. And again, if we do this, we could test each one. So in type 2, we have 3 that are above it. And if we check to see what the average is for type 2, so we have 600, 800, and 1300, and 800. There are 4 of them again. The average is, and this is rent, I think, 583. So those are all above the average. So this works, and it compares like to like. Again, these are very confusing to get the hang of. This is where it refers, this refers to the outer query, and this is the inner query. And the two have to be on the same grant type for the comparison to happen. So that's a correlated subquery. One last thing I will say about it is that in job interviews, this is where they usually try to trip you up, is by showing you something that can only be solved with a correlated subquery. All right, so again, read the book on this, or the chapter on this, because it has more information. That is, I think, all for this video.